I'm Walter Block.
I'm Jody Emery.
This is Adam Kokesh.
I'm Jeffrey Tucker.
I'm Ben Swann.
I'm Tom Woods.
I'm Peter Schiff.
I'm Eric Voorhees.
And you're listening to...
And you're listening...
And you're listening...
You're listening...
You're listening to...
Ed and Ethan soak up the awesomeness.
You are listening to Ed and Ethan, the voice of liberty in Canada, coming to you from Saskatoon in the province of Saskatchewan. And I I feel like I should be auctioneer. No bidding, no bidding, no bidding.
It all kind of sounds like babble for me.
They go to school to learn that babble, Ed.
They do.
All right. Of course, my intrepid co-host, Ed, joins me as he always does. I am your humble, but... Well, yeah. I'm humble. I am your humble host, Ethan. You're listening to us on Liberty Express Radio at libertyexpressradio.com. Why is that so funny? Also, the Liberty Radio Network, LMR, Daily Paul, Freedom Phalanx, and Voluntary Virtues Network at voluntaryvirtuesnetwork.com, I think. Sure, why not? We're somewhere, everywhere, and out there. Wow, that last part especially. So we're going to talk to Ben Swann in the second half of the show. He's going to be able to stick around for the after show, one would hope. And we'll talk to him all about benswann.com. Is Ben an anarchist? You're going to find out here. There's our clickbait. For those who listened to the previous show, clickbait. Also, I am going to address specifically for our hardcores that are subscribed to the RSS feed. First off, thank you very kindly.
Yes.
We enjoy the bootlicking. No, I'm kidding around. But we will address healthcare insurance. Again, we did have a discussion
in general.
Yeah, sure. For those who are not in the know or perhaps didn't catch the last episode or who knows what's wrong with you, we talked about insurance in the last show, in our after show.
There was some yelling too.
Our chase producer. There was a little bit of yelling. Hey, it was all very friendly.
It was okay though. We were all good.
Nobody died. So we're going to talk about insurance because our chase producer was and still is of the opinion that in a free market, in an unencumbered free market, no such thing as insurance would exist. It is not competitive. I remain in disagreement. Now, he's not here to defend himself. It's the best time to address it. but we'll get to that in the after show. For now, we're going to talk about minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right? Seattle passing $15 an hour minimum wage law.
Major fail, as you pointed out in your article. And they are bumping it up, too. Yeah,
well, okay. So when I had written originally about Seattle's $15 minimum wage proposal, they had a 20-year phase-in plan, which basically, if you look at the past 20 years, and as I wrote in my article, if you look at the past 20 years, and just ignore all that part with the whole high interest rate stuff, because that'll never happen again, right? Yeah, sure. If you look at the past 20 years, the rate of inflation that has taken place officially, we know that's bunkum, but officially, if it happens the same in the next 20 years, the 20-year phase-in plan that Seattle originally had would actually mirror inflation. In fact, at the end of the 20 years, I think Seattle minimum wage earners would end up 6 cents per hour ahead of inflation.
Yeah. See what happened.
It's amazing what people will show up for that nickel. Waving sign. Give me my nickel. No, I'm kidding.
And what happened, Ethan, was
that the city
they don't understand economics, but the city councilors read your article. No, they wouldn't. That doesn't make any sense.
No. So instead, what's happened now is rather than 20 years, which still would have been a disaster, but rather than 20 years. They are phasing this in over about 3 years. For different sized employers, there are different time frames.
Oh, okay.
But $15 an hour is going to be the minimum wage in Seattle. It's going to be an island of disaster. Because what's going to happen, obviously, first off, we're going to see more automation, right? Look, you said this to me off air. It makes total sense. It's simple math. Right?
Yeah, that's all it is. It's troublesome because it is math, and that you think that people would figure it out.
Well, okay. I point out first off,
but emotion, man.
in my article, when this was a 20-year plan, not a 3-year plan, my God, when I initially pointed this out and said, okay, look, if you're not even going to keep up with inflation, first off, so these people clearly don't even understand what they're clamoring for. But beyond that, yeah, it's simple math. Are your labor hours putting out a certain amount of productivity?
Yeah.
So if you are causing your employer to realize, let's say, $20 every hour of productivity out of you net, then you should be worth about $20. At that point, you negotiate where the employer gets their profit margin out of your productivity, right?
It's like you're saying that I'm not valued as much as I should be, so I should force people to value me more.
Well, that's exactly what minimum wage laws are.
It's
refusing to look at the reality of how productive you are and saying, look, people more productive than I need to, in a sense, subsidize my wage. The reason that I say it like that is because when you demand that your wage be set at a certain level, you're being, it's kind of like a mini case, a microcosmical case of corporatism, right? You're saying, I don't want to compete with other people. I don't want to compete with other laborers to sell my labor. I just want the government to set the price. Wow. Where do you get off?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, look, it's not seen as that. It's the poor clamoring for their rights to earn a wage.
And what's interesting, not
very
very
many
many
their cable subscription.
not many people are on the minimum wage, and the people that are on the minimum wage are not on the minimum wage for very long either. Like, I think the average is like 8 months or something like that. Maybe a year or something like that. It's such a small segment of the population that it affects. And I think when you get paid a low wage, it's an incentive for you to better yourself to get paid more. That's how you show value. You don't show value by forcing it.
But Ed, that's so heartless. Isn't that terrible, Ed, that you would say? I mean, come on, there are people trying to raise families.
On the minimum wage, man, that is, I would say what happened to birth control, situations happen, right? But
sure, situations do happen, and you have to deal with the realities of life.
Go to the community for help. Don't force the community to help you.
You're not entitled.
Yes.
Right?
There you go.
But people sure think they are. And this is another thing, too. I saw, it was funny, I recently saw, because by the way, I want to tell people I'm back into Twitter. Okay, I realized that it's actually a lot of fun. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I strongly urge you to follow Ethan Erk. That's Ethan, ETHANERK. That's my Twitter handle. Please go ahead, follow, because I love this. Okay, Twitter seems to have become like this perhaps far too accessible avenue for every little thought that passes through my head. It's so much fun. Anyway, okay. Somebody on Twitter tweeted this, the myths of the free market, and one of them was the assertion that greater economic activity is in fact not a way for people in poverty to experience a better standard of living, right?
Okay.
So the idea is, economic growth only benefits the wealthy.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in a corporatist system, we know that that's quite. That's quite apropos. It does benefit mainly the wealthy, but even in a corporatist system, and that's not what I'm advocating for by any means, but even in a corporatist system, economic growth does absolutely it does absolutely improve the quality of living for those who are living under the poverty line or in poverty, right?
Well, yeah,
it's relative. Here's the thing. And this is one of the major problems with economic growth as it occurs in a corporatist system. When economic growth happens, the people who benefit most are those who are wealthy, or because they buy government, right? So they get preferential treatment, and others get guns pointed at them to make sure that the preferential treatment is enforced. Okay, but even in that case, it's just a matter of perception. Yes, you're not as well off. You're not as better well off as the wealthy individuals, but you are still better off in your personal situation in a net sense. right?
Yeah, look at China, right? Look at right now it's happening in Vietnam. Look at Bangladesh. All these countries with cheap labor. Well, if they didn't have that cheap labor, they'd be working subsistence farming jobs.
Right.
So now they have a wage. They're earning a wage. Yeah, it's not a very high wage. It's not the greatest standards of working standards, not up to our standards that have changed in the last 100 years.
Sure. Well, to put it very simply, if a very wealthy person goes from living an average of 90 years to 100 years, and you, an impoverished person, go from living an average of 60 years to 62 years, you didn't gain as much, but you gained. So, and there's a wider discussion there about, corporatism and how it does indeed favor the wealthy. But anyway, let's move on because I want to make sure we get at least a few of these in here, especially in light of, and we'll get to this after this story because I think this is interesting. This story came up before the shootings in Moncton. Is Moncton in New Brunswick? Yes. So in the Maritimes, we'll do that.
Do that.
Yeah. Okay. In the Maritimes in Canada, 3 police officers were shot dead by a fellow toting around his rifles. He's been taken into custody alive, which is interesting. I guess we really are just that much more polite. Kanakastanis.
It's a tragedy that people died.
Yeah, it's terrible.
That sucks.
It's awful, and we'll get into that. But before we do, I want to mention this story from castanet.net. Okay, here's what happened. So this guy is packing up to go to, I think it was a fishing trip? Yeah, a fishing derby. Oh, I just didn't want to say fishing derby because it sounded so cliche and old school. All right, so this guy was packing his truck to take his son to a fishing derby, and a neighbor saw him packing firearms that were legally owned.
This
right?
was in Kelowna, too, by the way.
Kelowna,
BC.
British Columbia, Canadian province full of bears and trees. And weed. So, well, I mean, that is British Columbia.
It's known for that, yeah.
So, so the neighbor, when they saw this, the neighbor didn't know that the guns were legally owned, but the neighbor called police. That's the kind of, the reason I'm mentioning this is because it's this hyperized sort of worry that exists in gun control friendly Canada that if you see guns, it must be wrong somehow. Call the police. Never mind that somebody might have a right to own them. Never mind that somebody may have a right to transport or carry them. Never mind. It's guns, call the police. Now that in and of itself is bad enough. Okay, that in and of itself is terrible because it so massively discourages the idea of people. It completely denormalizes the idea that people should be able to carry around these tools of self-defense. But what's even worse than that is when the police show up, the RCMP respond, and rather than say, "Sir, are those legal? Do you have a permit?" as the revenue generators may be expected to say. No. In fact, what they do is they guns drawn, handcuff the guy, arrest him, and then determine, the guns are legal. And they become very apologetic. We're very sorry.
Oh,
but,
they really? Yeah, that's what they.
Okay. Well, that's
they're
what
Canadians, right? RCMP, right?
Sorry, buddy. Look, but I mean, it's so ridiculous that is the prevailing attitude of society, is to be so scared. And the police so confrontational, right? The police don't go in saying, "Hey," in their very Canadian fashion, "Hey, buddy, what's up, guy?" Like they don't go in politely saying, we're both human beings here. Let's determine what's going on. Why do you have guns? Because, our paranoid neighbors are worried. In and of itself, ridiculous. No, they go in guns drawn. I mean, just aggressive as all heck over something that is not, it's a non-issue. Now, in Moncton, New Brunswick, I think that, or the Maritimes, that region of Canada, I think that, First off, it's a complete and utter tragedy. It's terrible. 3 people have lost their lives, and it is gut-wrenching to know that has happened because the loss of life is something that can't be undone. There's no opportunity for restorative justice. There's no way to make that okay. It's done, and it's I'm not sure. It's terribly heart-wrenching, let me tell you.
Do you know much of the details of what exactly happened? Because I am pretty much in the dark on what actually happened. What spurred this whole?
No, the details are pretty sparse, which is interesting that he's been captured alive, the shooter.
Yeah,
because hopefully we'll
You
find
think
out more.
A cop killer, you think that they go guns blazing? You know what I mean?
That's usually the case, right?
Uh-huh.
But anyway, so this guy in the Maritimes, when he takes up arms against police, because as far as I know, and again, details are sparse, right? But as far as I know, he was resisting police confiscating his weapons.
Huh. Wow.
Now,
Wow.
that said, he was exposing himself publicly in a way. That's not what that came out wrong. He was putting himself into the public sphere in such a way as he expected that police would respond and try to take his weapons.
Like he was showing off his guns, essentially.
Yes.
Is that he's trying to open carry in Canada.
And
He's
you
thinking
can't
he's
do
from
that.
the States.
Well, obviously you can't do that up
No.
here. It is illegal. So he was expecting a confrontation.
Yeah, okay.
He was basically trying to make something happen. Now, there's a lot of discussion that we could go into about whether or not that's right or wrong, whether or not he was ethically correct, all that stuff. But I think that this is a symptom. I don't want to go there. I think what I want to focus on here is mentioning that this is a symptom of a society that's centrally planned and that gives authority to certain individuals to violate rights as a matter of their job and their duty, right? There is a situation that exists within Canada where those who wish to exercise their rights will meet violence from the state. It does create, I think, a situation where things like this shooting in Moncton become... It kind of sets the stage for it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So now there are 3 people dead who I think probably never would have been dead if we respected the rights of individuals. Now, of course, people will say, but if you let guns go everywhere, people will die left, right, and center. Gun violence will escalate. I want to talk about that too. Okay? This is a real problem. Okay, first off, I'm not here to argue that correlation is causation.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So I will point to Kennesaw, Georgia, with two things in mind.
Okay.
First off, that a high rate of gun ownership does not equate to people dying left, right, and center. Obviously, Kennesaw, Georgia is a really good example of a high rate of gun ownership being a place, and being a place where people don't die just because there are a bunch of guns around.
Less crime? Is that typical too in that sense?
Well, here's what I was thinking of. Okay, first off, I am not going to say that Kennesaw, Georgia is specifically safer because of a high rate of gun ownership. I tend to believe that personally. I think that has an influence, but I'm not going to argue that because that's correlation. I don't think it's overtly credible. There's a lot of other stuff that we can inject in there. We only have 5 minutes left, though. So the other side is the liberal argument, which is more guns equals more violence. That's just as silly. It's correlation. What you're ignoring are larger problems. So Kennesaw, Georgia is very affluent. Kennesaw, Georgia just it's got a better social construct to it. There is more peaceful substance in Kennesaw, Georgia. I think that's what actually matters. When we talk about banning or encouraging the use or ownership of guns, I think we're basically looking at a surface issue. And this shooting in Moncton is born of an issue that has nothing to do with guns.
Like the fact that, if people point to Canada, we have gun restrictive laws, so it's safer here. Well, it's because of the culture, not because of the laws.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's it. It's all cultural stuff, right? The guns and gun violence. I mean, knife violence is a symptom of cultural problems. It's not about knives, right? Suicides are a symptom of cultural problems. Look, you go to northern communities in Canada with high rates of teen suicide. It's not a problem to do with anything that those teens have sadly used to end their lives. It has nothing to do with the tools that they used. It has everything to do with the social problems that exist. And the same can be said absolutely for gun violence. Absolutely anywhere. That is, and how do you make a society safer? And I honestly think that it's not about violating the rights of individuals. It's not about confronting. If you inject violence into society, you will reap what you sow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, this is how I see policing in general, right? Modern policing is the injection of violence into society. I know that the aim is to make society a peaceful place, to keep the peace, but I don't think it achieves that. I think people, I mean, when I say, I don't think we need police, people come out, and you say, look, whenever you need help, I hope the police don't come and help you because you're just so ignorant.
What slave on slave attack there, hey? Jeez. But I'm struggling because you said this guy was like he had some libertarian leanings, or he shared even Tim Moen's meme.
Oh yeah,
one of his
he did.
memes or something.
Yeah.
So that doesn't. I'm kind of scared because that doesn't really bode well for us in general. In that we're on the internet, we're talking about these ideas. And then this guy, he kind of has that same, I don't know the guy, and I don't really know what's going on, honestly. But if that's the case, people could paint us in a broad brush too. You know what I mean? And then if we come out and say, which is true, I'm in full agreement with you. Cops, they're not my heroes.
Sure. I mean, what was the teenager celebrity son that went crazy in the States there?
Yeah, I can't remember his name either.
Elliot Rogers, that was it. Yeah, Elliot Rogers.
Creepy, man.
He was a left-wing gun control nut.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I mean, look, but the point is, again, these people's ideology, their outlook, doesn't really have anything to do with the horrifying crimes that they commit, right?
Yeah,
or rather, the actions that they take.
It doesn't, but people can paint it like that.
Sure, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
if they want to, and of course, it's them that has that agenda, and they're screwed up people for doing that.
In that case, we just have to respond, right? I mean, look, and Tim Moen, by the way, as leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, did respond, I think, in probably the most politically proper way he could. And he did explain that, libertarianism is not about the initiation of violence or seeking conflict. It is about seeking out the greatest value possible. And certainly this guy didn't do that. He sought out conflict. It is terrifying. He's got some issues there. I don't know.
He sought out conflict in the statist paradigm that we live in, right?
Yeah, sure.
There's this whole...
And again, right, like I said, deeper issues at work. There's a larger problem here at play, and it's about the social dynamic that exists. Modern policing, I really think, sets the stage for that kind of violence to take place.
Well,
we went pretty heavy.
The drug war right there is a huge... you could point it to that. Just
We're going to have to address this on the after show. The whole, the sheriffs asking for your prayers because they threw a grenade at a baby.
We'll get to that, and we'll also get to the government orders federal departments to keep tabs on all demonstrations across Canada.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Listen up, Kazakhstanis. Big Brother's watching, eh? Oh, you better beware. So yeah, we'll talk about that, all that stuff in the after show. We'll address the health insurance thing.
Yeah, Ben Swann too. Coming up.
Right after. I had this case, man.
I screwed you up again.
Yeah, it just messed me right up. But that's okay. We'll be back after these valuable messages and the music with Ben Swann. This is Ed and Ethan.
The Electronic Frontier Foundation, or EFF, fights to protect your rights in the digital world. When a patent troll threatened podcasters, they fought back. EFF has also defended your right to encryption and has sued the NSA to end the government's mass, suspicionless surveillance. There are different ways you can help EFF, from donations, to signing petitions, to writing your representatives, to just spreading the word. Find out more at EFF.org. That's EFF.org.
Zombie what brains?
Now from Global Edmonton, the News Hour with Gordon.
Brains.
This is CNN.
Brains.
This is CTV News.
Brains.
CBC News.
Brains.
The Ed and Ethan Podcast. Come to where the brains are. As always, the message is invaluable. That's why they're there, right?
Paying the bills.
Don't sound so doubtful. All right. So,
Paying the bills, sort of. I don't know.
So anyway, like I mentioned before, well, it depends on which stream you are and whose bills they're paying. As I mentioned before, we're going to be talking to Ben Swann, so we should have him right away here. I wanted to talk to Ben about a number of different things. We know that the Ben Swann is a Bitcoin evangelist of sorts.
Yes.
You can see him at various sorts of conferences, that kind of thing. He does pop up every so often.
He's got his radio show too, his new radio show, which is great, by the way.
Yeah, because he put some expressive opinion in there. That's interesting. We'll ask him about that.
And I'm excited about this new revelations out of the Anarchast, Jeff Berwick's podcast type
We'll ask
show
him if
there.
that's a revelation. We'll see.
Okay,
We'll see.
okay.
So you should be connected now. Mr. Ben Swann from benswann.com. How goes your day today?
It's going great. Ed and Ethan, thanks for having me on, guys.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. It's been a while since we had you on. And actually, the first time we had you on, we basically took clips of you and put them at the front of the show, the middle of the show, the back of the show, everywhere. We peppered the show with Ben Swann because we were basically at the point at that time where we thought, oh, we have Ben Swann on the show. Oh my goodness, I'm so Twitter-pated. Oh. So we couldn't help ourselves. I hope it wasn't too off-putting. But today, I wanted to ask, okay, so when we talked to you before, you had your show on Fox 19, I think it was Fox 19 in Cincinnati, Reality Check. You were one of the anchors there. Now you have become an independent media mogul of sorts, if I could be so liberal with the phrase, and you are on the Republic Broadcasting Network with your own, what is it, a 2-hour show daily?
It is a 2-hour show daily. I will tell you guys that ends this next week.
Really?
Oh.
Why?
Yeah. Well, what we've decided to do is, listen, I love RBN. I love what they're doing. I think they're terrific people over there. But, for us, this is kind of this process of figuring out what the best fit for us is. And so we're actually going to take that same 2-hour show, but we're moving it off radio, and we're going to create the first of its kind YouTube Google Hangout broadcast. It'll be broadcast through YouTube. It'll be broadcast through various internet sites, including benswann.com, with a live stream 2 hours a day. So we're really trying to lean on something that's much more video friendly. We've talked to the folks at Google. They're very excited about it. They say this will be the first of its kind in terms of journalism, the first kind of show that would actually cover issues this way. So very excited about it, and we'll be launching that in July.
That's really cool because I was going to tell people, our home is libertyexpressradio.com. That's where we find the majority of our audience. That's where we, like to call ourselves, that's where we sit on the couch, right? And you are on libertyexpressradio.com. So I guess you're going to be moving off of there as well. Are you going to be pushing this Google Hangouts broadcast stream to a number of different internet radio affiliates? What's going on with that?
What we're going to do with it right now is we're certainly going to have it on a number of websites. Okay. So we already have affiliate agreements, if you want to call them affiliates, where different sites will be streaming the show daily on their homepage so that people can see it and watch it there. And you used the term evangelist earlier. I really consider myself to be a liberty evangelist, right? Really trying to spread the idea of individual liberty and freedom to people, and trying to reveal in many ways what's happening in media that disenfranchises people or robs them of that freedom. And so we think this is a great way to do it, and I think it's a format that fits well for what we're trying to do. It
really does sound exciting. I like that. This is something that's basically almost every time I look at benswann.com, something new is coming up. You're generating a lot of really good content, and it seems like you really are actively probing that how do we get our media out to as many people as possible in as consumable a format as possible, right?
I honestly think out of all the people that I retweet on Twitter, I think Ben Swann is the one I retweet the most, actually. Yeah.
Well, that's great. No, I appreciate that. And really, that's what we're going for, is we really want to be able to create good content without seeking to create content for the sake of just creating it, right? And so, I think when people look at our content and what we're putting out, We really do strive to cover stories. I'll just give you a quick example. We have one that just went up about Uber and Lyft, those car sharing services, being given a cease and desist order by the DMV in Virginia because they are a for-profit business that's profiting off people sharing rides. And it's
How
things
dare
that drive me insane, but I feel like they get so little coverage out there because to some people, they're not quite sexy enough. They're not quite, scandalous enough, I guess. And to me, I think they're exactly where the pulse of the country is in terms of revealing the idea of liberty, revealing the idea of capitalism to that, again, fairly mainstream audience. And they're not getting this anyplace else. So that's what we're trying to be the bridge to alternative. And I think, as you said, I think that it's an accurate observation to say that we're constantly looking for new ways to do this. I mean, we're less than a year into our project. And so, there's a lot of growth that still has to happen.
And you guys, you are completely funded by your fans. Yeah,
and some advertising. Is that what is your funding
so
model?
Advertising, we use Google Ads right now, and hopefully we're going to expand that as well. Because of the videos that we're putting out, we're finally able to do that with Google Video Ads, which is apparently a very difficult process. I had no idea how difficult of a process this is, but we do. But the majority of what we have raised through crowdfunding is what we have launched our projects with, and we just shot part of 2 new episodes of the Truth and Media Project, which is 100% crowdfunded.
And how many people do you employ with that?
Well, everyone who works for us is a contractor, right? Okay. So we have no direct employees, but everybody else is a contractor, which means if the IRS is listening to this, which means that everyone who works for us either also works for other folks as well. Nobody is full-time for us.
Okay.
And so, but overall, if you count all of the production, if you count folks that we hire for web, writers, all of that, it's probably 24 people.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I asked you about I called you kind of a media mogul of sorts. You are in the alternative media space. You do have a donation model built into your funding model. I'm kind of curious, because Ed and I were talking about this off air. We were talking about the sustainability of donation-based models for content providers. And I have a really big problem with the concept of the sustainability of a model like that. The reason that I say that, we look to certain people we might watch or read from, say, like Stéphane Molyneux.
James Colbert?
Sure. People who really rely on those donations to keep them going from their user base. They really are accountable to their user base. If they don't provide good content, then they'll lose their donators, and that's all really cool. I tend to think these sorts of people who experience success like that are anomalies. And the reason that I say that is because, first off, there aren't very many of them. And secondly, I think the reason that they are anomalies is because I see donation models as being disincentivized by the state. I mean, on one of my paychecks, I got $1,000 in deductions. I am sorry, but if you come to me for a donation at that point, I'm not very.
You could call it deductions, or you could call it.
I'm a victim of mugging, right?
Yeah.
So, I think, Ben, there's a real problem with the donation model for a lot of people out there. What's your perspective on it? Would you go to a mugging victim and ask them for money?
Right. Well, no, listen, I think you're absolutely right. First of all, a couple of points, because you covered a lot of ground there.
Sure,
but,
yeah.
I think, first of all, number one, is it sustainable to only exist as a donation model? And the answer to that is it depends on what you want to do. Right. So if your model is built upon really expanding into larger media, which is what we're trying to do, no. We cannot be 100% sustained that way. It's simply not possible. But there are different levels of it. There are subscription models. You got guys out there like Glenn Beck, who's been incredibly successful with a subscription-based model. You have folks who are doing crowdfunding, and there's a lot of success. We've had a lot of success in that space. But I will tell you this: that is becoming an especially crowded space right now.
Right.
And it's very difficult. I mean, I look at some folks out there like Luke Rudowski's working right now to put together his Indiegogo campaign and struggling to find funds there. And it's not because he doesn't have a great project, but I almost feel like crowdfunding is reaching a certain level of fatigue And it's difficult, when you're basically going back to the same pool of people, it's very difficult to raise money that way. The reality is this, though, that I think what we have to recognize is you take all those and you combine that with the fact that there is a very specific demographic, especially within the liberty movement, a very specific demographic that is of value to advertisers. Now, there are some people who get terrified when you start using words like advertising, right? Because, oh no, you're suddenly compromised because you have advertisers, which is ridiculous. As long as you have integrity and don't allow your advertisers to come in and say, you will talk about this or you won't talk about this, then what's the problem with advertisers? There isn't an issue there. But that comes back to, how much value do you allow the advertisers to have? Do you offset some of that by allowing people to have a voice in it? So I think there's a hybrid model that can be created. That's actually what we're trying to create, is a hybrid that really pulls funding from multiple sources. Because just as great as the crowdfunding thing is, it's also a curse in that you can be doing great work with great integrity, and be talking about truth, and that doesn't mean that the quote unquote crowd or the mob likes it. Right. So you can be, for instance, I just give you for example, if you are raising money and the majority of your supporters are Rand Paul supporters because they love liberty, and then all of a sudden you step up and say, oh, and by the way, Rand Paul says the 5 guys who are in the Taliban that we traded for that U.S. soldier, we should drone them now that they're out. What?
Okay.
The Rand Paul people might not like that and say, well, then we're going to pull our funding from you. Well, that makes you no different than the advertiser who wants to exert pressure because you want to talk about vaccines, and they say, hey, you can't talk about vaccines. We make vaccines,
Okay, I see where you're going, as the crowd can exert influence just as though an advertiser can exert influence, right? But I guess for people who are looking at that crowdfunding model, I guess the idea would be, isn't that a good thing? Isn't it a good thing that the audience can be the arbiter of what you think, what sort of content you're pushing out?
Well, but that can be a good thing, but it can be a negative. It all depends on what the crowd wants, right? Because truth does not belong to any subset of people. And so whenever you have a group of people who have decided, I was at United We Stand Fest, and they asked me a question about, and most of the people there are very young, and it's very anti-Monsanto. It was very anti-corporations, and it was more of the, I don't believe in the left-right paradigm, but if you're going to use that terminology, it was much more of the left side of the liberty movement, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. And so, we're up there talking, and someone asked me about journalism and what advice would you give people about journalism? And I said, if you want to be a journalist, that's great, but you need to pursue truth. You don't go into a story, for instance, and say, I know GMOs are bad and they're killing me and they're killing you, so I'm going to go do a story to prove that. Right. Because that's not journalism. That's propaganda. When you set out to prove a point based upon a presumption or an assumption, that's not journalism. And I was surprised they actually applauded. I thought I was going to get booed, and that's okay. But the problem is when you get into any crowd setting, there are people who think, oh, wait a minute, if you don't say what I am presuming to be true or assuming to be true, then you're a hack, or you're not being truthful. And therefore, you can have the exact same problem that we have in media today, where you have cronies and advertisers who control the messaging.
Okay. So I guess that's an interesting point, right? Is you get this sort of problem where content providers are really, it's not about being accountable necessarily to your listeners, to your advertisers, to your affiliates, what have you. It's really about, how do I find the best way to be accountable to my own views? How do I tell the most truth possible? How do I create content that is truly from me and not for others, right? I guess there is something I wanted to ask you about, and let's. I really want to make sure we address this before we hit an after show, which I hope you'll have time to stick around for. we just get disconnected because Skype is that fantastic. You know what? The NSA eating up all this bandwidth, I'm tired of that.
Are you guys there? I can hear you now.
Yeah. I was just saying the NSA eating up our bandwidth, and now the CIA joins Twitter. So of course there's that. That service is going to go slow now. Anyway, okay. What I was going to get to, Ben, was I wanted to ask you about an appearance recently by you on Anarcast. So Jeff Berwick runs into you at a Bitcoin conference, hooks his claws into you, throws a mic in your face, and you're on Anarcast. So I wanted to ask
I was surprised, but joyfully surprised.
Well, okay, Ed and I identify quite openly as anarcho-capitalists with all the baggage that term carries. Yes. You are much more diplomatic, but I do want to ask you specifically about this, about how you identify. Would it be fair to call you an anarchist? How did you arrive to where you are? Give me a kind of an overview.
Well, I think that it's certainly an evolution, right, in terms of philosophy and beliefs. I think if you boil down, and I've kind of been in this process for about a year now of understanding these things. If you were to say, are you an anarchist? I believe I am an anarchist more so than anything else, because I believe that people should be taking care of each other. And I believe in community. Now, some people think of anarchy as being the ultimate kind of solo expression of, you go off in the woods and live in a cabin someplace and have nothing to do with anyone else. Right, because you're an anarchist.
Really, I thought it was about twisting handlebar mustaches and tossing Molotov cocktails into bars.
Molotov cocktail, right? So it's either that or the guy with the mohawk who's throwing a Molotov cocktail through a window because he's an anarchist.
Right.
And of course, that whole concept is that anarchy equals chaos, and it doesn't. It actually equals order. But it's not derived from a centralized power. And I don't have to explain that to you guys. You guys totally understand that.
Yeah.
But I think for the average person out there, when they hear anarchy, it's an idea that's scary to them, and I think it's been intentionally made scary, right? Because as soon as you hear that someone's an anarchist, it's this person wants they want chaos and they want disorder. No, actually, what they want is they want real order, which is people caring for each other and not having some authority, centralized authority that is commanding their life in some way. So. Just as again, I like to use examples of this. So let me just give you a quick one. And this is, about as microcosm as you can get. So I apologize for that. But somebody was telling me just the other day, they said, we're talking about the street that I live on, and there's a cul-de-sac nearby. And the guy says, you might recognize my truck. I drive the gray truck. He says, there's a guy who drives a blue pickup. Sometimes he parks it in the middle of the cul-de-sac, but he's a cop, so I guess he can get away with that. And I was like, see, that is why I'm an anarchist.
Yeah.
Why is it that you're parked in the middle of the cul-de-sac because you're a cop? And when you finish your sentence with, I guess he can get away with that? Why? Why can you get away with that? If it's okay for you to do it, we should all have our trucks parked in the middle of the cul-de-sac in a beautiful flower arrangement if that's what we want to do, right? But the fact that one person can because, they have authority, other people can't because there's a code that's been written to say you have to park in this particular space, in this particular distance. I mean, I think that just is where society it really breaks down. It's not creating order in society, it just creates chaos in society.
Well, it's the injection of initiated violence.
It is.
And the rules that are being applied are social conformity rules. And those rules are anarchy because each individual person is respecting each other individual. They're not saying, these rules come down from government, they come down from authority, and we're going to respect the rules because they're the rules. We're going to respect the rules because we respect each other. And that's why anarchy is great.
That's absolutely right. Now, in that same conversation, the guy was explaining to me the reason he parks where he does is because he had parked in front of another neighbor's house recently, and the neighbor showed up at his house and said, hey, could you not park in front of my place because we want to use that spot? And he says, and technically I have every right to park there if I park there first. There's no law that stops me from doing that. And then he says, but, out of respect. And it's exactly what you just said, out of respect. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Nothing actually prevents you from doing it other than saying, I'm going to respect your space. Now, the problem, of course, with anarchy is that if there isn't some form of order or at least, community, then you always have the stronger who prey on the weaker. And you always have someone who's going to exert force upon someone else as long as they can. And that's where community and anarchy, I think, becomes very important, because within community, you build structures by which groups of people are stronger. And then, of course, we get into this whole discussion about, well, then that group becomes bigger and stronger and it overcomes you. And, and so to me, anarchy is more of a philosophy than the practicality of it. But I think there's a lot of practical things that we can take from it and say, let's start applying these things now. We don't have to go 100% in this direction in order to start saying, hey, cops, stop parking in the middle of the cul-de-sac.
Well, I think you're probably right in some respect. I can't find anything to disagree with there. The idea of anarchy is very dependent upon organization. But you're talking too about how instances of initiated violence or violence at all are really more expensive an option than peaceful cooperation. So the neighbor that comes over to the other neighbor and says, "Could you please not park in that spot?" It's a much greater value proposition to say, yes, I can find a way to make this work, than it is to say, no, let's start a long, protracted dispute and really get at each other's throats. Because you know what? I love drama in my life, and that's just going to be fun.
There are those people too, right? We all know them, because there's always going to be the one person who loves drama.
Sure.
To make it dramatic. And that's when,
well, I think
that's when force must be used.
Frankly, I think that's a cultural dysfunction that is born typically of psychological problems, but it's actually worth talking about those sorts of people and how a peaceful society deals with them by examining and identifying antisocial behavior. And in a polycentric legal system, we've talked about that here very often, how people can organize in order to recognize antisocial behavior and disincentivize it voluntarily without having to. I mean, Ed and I are really not even in favor of the prison system
Locking
idea.
people in cages.
We don't even like that. We think that prisons can even be a voluntary sort of exercise. But before we end off this segment, we only got about 4 minutes left. And before we go into the I never actually asked you, Ben, can you stick around for an after show? Would you have time for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it's flowing like this,
Great.
Time's almost up. It's a little chipped.
So, okay. Before we do go, I wanted to ask you to, I wanted this to get out to all the affiliates as well. Now, I know that you accept Bitcoin for donations on benswann.com. Why did you get interested in Bitcoin initially, and how long ago was that?
It was actually last July. We were in New Hampshire, in fact, kicking off the Truth in Media project, and some people that I work with who part of my team is in New Hampshire, and they're part of the Free State Project. They had said to me, hey, would you consider accepting Bitcoin? Because a lot of people who are using Bitcoin. I didn't even know what it was. And so I looked into it a little bit, got on a Skype call with Roger Ver. He was in Tokyo at the time, and I think he's still there. And of course, he's a guy who's like, I think he's awake 24 hours a day. He's a very interesting guy. And so he starts explaining it. And, when you first hear about it, it's very confusing. I think it's much easier to understand now because there's just more exposure to it. But in the beginning, especially, it was like, how does this work? And of course, the very first question I ask is, so what is it backed by? And instead of telling me, he says, what's the dollar backed by? Well, I'm like, well, nothing. He says, well, yeah, right. So we're not backed by anything either. And I was like, oh, okay. He says, so it doesn't make us any less valuable than Bitcoin. Okay, well, that's fair. And then he goes on to explain, okay, so here are the different ways that it has value in terms of, the limited number of coins that are out there and how mining works. And see, I actually have come to believe since then that, Bitcoin, people like to refer to it as being unregulated. I actually think that's a misnomer. I think that's a poor use of terminology. To me, Bitcoin is absolutely regulated, but it's entirely market regulated, as opposed to being regulated by government forces or by, some legal apparatus. And I think it's demonstrating to the world something that has been long forgotten called capitalism and the free market, which quite candidly, guys, does not exist anywhere in the world today except for in Bitcoin. I mean, where else is there actually a free market?
That's a good point. A free market does not exist. If look, the way to
market,
get rid of
the black market is like pseudo free market.
The black market as a consequence of a regulated market is
because the problem with black market is, though, it is still driven by another market.
Yeah,
that's
it's not entirely free because the value of everything on the black market relates directly to whatever's happening within a regulated market.
Right. It is dependent entirely upon that incentive structure that is created by a monopolized, oligopolized market, whatever the case may be. The black market is, in a sense, more a free market than a state-driven market, but certainly it is a consequence of the state market, and that's certainly nothing that we want. Ben, we're going to carry on into the after show, so right after the music, those on our RSS feed, stick around. Visit benswann.com for all of the latest from Ben and his many writers with lots of content being pumped out of there. I want to thank everybody right here on Liberty Express Radio for listening to the program. And I'm sure I had some other stuff to say.
I want to say thank you to Michael Shanklin, too, for having us on his new network that is this is our first show on the network that is going to be out there. And
But I thought we had some others, but it turns out, no, this is going to be it's like that big test run.
This is the first actual week that they're broadcasting.
Sure. Yes. So Voluntary Virtues Network, or VVN. Right? Yeah, okay. All right. So once again, thanks a bunch, and be sure to tune in right here on RSS. Stay tuned if you're on our RSS feed for the after show. In the meantime, on all of the other, see, the problem is I tried to end too early. So if you remember, if you lie to the government, it's felony, but if the government lies to you, it's politics. This is Ed and Ethan.